Greetings, gaming citizens. Mike here. Emulation is great, right? I can take any game out there and instantly play it on my computer with a controller I find comfortable. Wait, my video looks fuzzy? Hold on, let me turn up the resolution settings. There we go. That's better. As I was saying, emulation is great. The ability to run any retro game on your computer or other device is so cool. You don't have to worry about region-locked games or not owning a particular system, and rare games are available at your fingertips. Best part? It's technically free. However, the concept of emulation has always been controversial in the gaming community. Yeah, you can play any retro game you want, but some would say there's a moral dilemma with emulation, as in a way it's stealing, and I use that term loosely. A question I see asked a lot about emulation is, where do we draw the line? Are there certain systems whose games we shouldn't emulate right now? Should we only be able to emulate up to a certain system and discourage those who cross that line? Well, that's where this video comes in. I wanted to talk about emulation, why people emulate games, and what about emulation drives people away. If you have your own thoughts on emulation that I skipped over in this video, let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear your takes. First, let's briefly go over where emulation came from. Emulation dates back to the mid-90s with the Nintendo Entertainment System, which came out in the 80s. Is it confusing? Good. CPUs were getting faster, and access to the internet was becoming more widespread. A few emulators existed around then, but they were all fairly buggy or played very basic games like Donkey Kong, so you couldn't play just any NES game on the computers at the time. One of the first emulators for the NES was developed by British programmer Paul Robson. This emulator was also one of the first to have the source code readily available, so people could see how it functioned and tweak it over time. Another emulator that existed out there was the NES Tikall, released in 1997. Yes, that's the real name. The 90s were f***ing wild. This was known for being one of the first few freeware emulators out there, which meant it was distributed with a free software license and source code was available to anyone. Fun fact, one of the emulators created during this time was by Yuji Naka for the Sega Genesis. Yeah, the same Yuji Naka that was the head of Sonic Team and created breakout hits like Nights into Dreams, Sonic Adventure, and Balan Wonderworld. This emulator, unlike others at the time, wasn't distributed to the public and was simply made as a hobby by Naka. But the fact that an NES emulator for the Genesis existed at all is pretty cool, especially since it was made by Yuji Naka himself. In the past 20 years, computers have certainly gotten faster and gaming hardware is always evolving. Gone are the days of LAN parties and Game Boy Link cables. Now we all have our latest gen consoles hooked up to the internet to play with friends from around the world. Or if you're a Nintendo fan, you have access to an overpriced internet service that only works on days when an employee remembers F-Zero existing.
Oh shit, you guys remember F-Zero?
With this evolution in game console technology, we have also seen emulators become more powerful and able to do more than just run basic NES games. Most emulators now include functionality for cheats, in case you want to say fuck you to every Pokemon game and just get 999 Master Balls. You know what they say, why play the game legitimately when you could just not? Most, if not all, modern emulators have save states these days. Forget about a game having any resemblance of challenge, just save beforehand. About to fight a really tough boss? Just make a save state right before you go into the boss's lair and just keep trying the fight until you beat it on your first try. Some emulators even make a game run better and look better than it would on the original hardware it was released for. I always see people talk about how their favorite games run at 60 FPS and have better graphics quality. But let's be honest, if you're playing anything more recent than the Nintendo GameCube, do you really need graphical enhancements? Look at this side-by-side comparison. Tell me which game is graphically improved over the other. That's a trick question. This is the same game. Sometimes even newer games benefit from emulation if their current system is underpowered. Within days of Metroid Dread's release, fans had already emulated it and said that it runs better on PC than Nintendo Switch. This seems to be a common trend lately, as Shin Megami Tensei 5 also ran better on PC, thanks to emulators like Yuzu, among others. While this is certainly great, there is something to be said with emulating games currently on the market, but more on that later. Most notably, however, is online multiplayer. Dolphin, a GameCube and Wii emulator, allows users to play games like Mario Party online via netplay, so there's no need to hunt down a GameCube, a copy of the game, 4 controllers, and 3 soon-to-be murder victims. I've played old Mario Party games online with friends, and it's run very smoothly for me. I'm impressed that Nintendo hasn't even done this for some of their own games. Emulation has all these benefits, sure, but what are the downsides? Probably the biggest point of discussion surrounding emulation is its legality, or rather the lack thereof. There's been a debate as to whether emulating games is legal or not, and the truth is, it is mostly a gray area. You see, there is nothing in the law that explicitly states emulation is illegal, but some would respond by saying it's unethical because it's technically stealing. That's not exactly true because you're just running the game file on another program. Yeah, it's not the platform that, say, Nintendo intended for you to use, but you're by no means stealing the game outright, especially if that game is no longer being sold. With that said, let's explore why people are so against it. The biggest point people like to make against emulation is that you should buy the games to support the developers. Well, if the game you want to play is made by a studio that abuses its developers, would you really want to financially support that? If you don't, then emulation might be the way to go. This is why people sometimes pirate Pokemon games. As recently, the Diamond and Pearl remakes were pirated before release because people don't want to support the Pokemon Company, and by extension Game Freak, or whoever is working on the games. Sometimes people can't support the developers even if they want to. Consider countries like Brazil or countries in the Middle East, where inflation makes it incredibly difficult to afford anything other than the bare necessities for survival. In Brazil, the Nintendo Switch was launched last year for the high price of $29.99 real, or roughly $570 US. In a case like this, you don't have much of a choice but to emulate games if you want to be able to feed yourself. What about games that are stuck on certain systems and haven't gotten a re-release? There are plenty of games that just never get acknowledged again, and are left to rot on the one system they were developed for. Metal Gear Solid 4 to this day still lives in PlayStation 3 purgatory. It's a shame too, because it's been highly praised by fans and critics alike, so it sucks that people just can't play the entire series because Konami just won't do anything with the IP. If only there was a reliable studio out there that was led by someone who had experience working on the Metal Gear Solid series that could port it to modern systems. Legends say it'll come to current-gen systems when Konami finally starts to give a shit. So never. What about older games that just never get released again? Well, this is the question I see geared towards mostly Nintendo games almost every time emulation is brought up. One game that frequents this discussion is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. Widely referred to as the best Paper Mario game, Thousand Year Door is notorious for being stuck on the GameCube and never acknowledged by Nintendo. For fuck's sake, they released the original Paper Mario on Nintendo Switch Online and still won't mention Thousand Year Door by name. The reason why Nintendo is often the biggest point of discussion for legacy content that isn't re-released is that they do it the most. F-Zero, Golden Sun, Kid Icarus, Fire Emblem, Pikmin, Mother. These are just a few franchises that never have their old content ported to newer platforms because Nintendo just doesn't care, or they don't see a financial incentive to do so. Or, in the case of Fire Emblem, they only give a shit for like 6 months and then take it off the eShop because fuck you, I guess. Sorry if it seems like I'm getting fired up about it, it's just this topic has been relevant for so long because of Nintendo's continued lack of acknowledgement, so it leads to many, including myself, to be frustrated. It's practically flawless logic when you think about it. If a series is not being supported by the developer, what's the issue with emulation? Nintendo isn't losing money from people emulating a game that is 20 years old, but that hasn't stopped Nintendo from shutting down emulation ROM sites. Then when they do bring back legacy content, it's behind an overpriced paywall or limited releases. Nintendo Switch Online's expansion pack is a huge example of this. About 10 Nintendo 64 games were announced to be added to the service, but the price of the service spiked because the Genesis games and Animal Crossing DLC were tacked onto it. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad we have games like Banjo-Kazooie and Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time coming to NSO, but the price point creates a higher barrier to entry because not everyone wants to drop $50 on just the individual plan. And if you're looking at the family plan, that's a lot more money. While we're talking about newer products and services like NSO, let's discuss the current market for games. One example I want to touch on is Metroid Dread. As I said, days after Dread's release, it was discovered that the game could run flawlessly at 60 FPS on emulators. Now, I think we all know Switch hardware is underpowered compared to the other consoles out there at this point. However, this game was barely a week old when this news came out. It is still being sold in stores. Why would you emulate a game that just came out? Don't misunderstand. I'm not some kind of corporate sympathizer or anything, but you have to admit, it's kind of a dick move to pirate a game that just came out. Speaking of online marketplaces, what about games that are limited to a platform that is having its digital storefront shut down? This question comes from the recent news about the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShops closing down next year, making it so hundreds of exclusive games are no longer accessible due to a lack of support on the Switch or other platforms. In addition, physical purchases of these games have become so difficult because the used market has made prices surge. It's not financially feasible to buy 3DS or Wii U games physically anymore because everyone is scalping them on websites like eBay. Let me ask you, if you had the choice to download a ROM of Yokai Watch or pay around $150 for a physical copy, which would you choose? Yeah, I thought so. So let's circle back to the main question. What justifies emulation? If you want my take, here's what I think justifies emulation. If you're in a country where purchasing games is near impossible due to inflation, like Brazil. If you don't want to support abusive developers, with a recent example being Activision Blizzard. If the game you're trying to emulate is hard to find, or the series just isn't supported by the developer anymore. At the end of the day, it's all up to personal preference. But what I will say is that emulation should not only be allowed in some cases, but encouraged for the sake of game preservation. There will come a day when our discs decide to rot, console hard drives will die, cartridges stop working, and at that point, our favorite games won't be accessible on the original hardware anymore. We need to be able to preserve the history of gaming as a medium for people that are like me and didn't grow up with these kinds of systems. Let me know your thoughts about emulation in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss gaming content from me or stream VODs. Thanks for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next one.